Mazda's RX-7 is a legendary rotary-powered sports car that's synonymous with Japanese tuner car culture, and it started right here with the first generation code FB Mazda RX-7. And people don't generally talk about the FB RX-7. Everyone's excited about the later FDs, the last generation that ended in 2002. And sometimes people will get into your face talking about FCs and the later RX-8, but the one rotary-powered sports car that was sold stateside that people don't really seem to care about or talk about all that much is the car that's sitting right in front of me. This is a 1985 Series 3 model FB Mazda RX-7 GSL Targa Edition, which means a couple things. GSL is the trim level of this RX-7. It was back in the 1980s where there was always some ridiculous trim level name for every single car. If you work a little bit harder, you can have the GXE 123 instead of the GXLS1, which came with a factory radio, that kind of thing. That was a common thing in the 70s and 80s, and it afflicted the legendary RX-7. And what does it mean that this RX-7 here is the GSL model? Basically nothing. There were a couple minor cosmetic upgrades on the interior, namely upgraded radio, power windows, and a couple options that were available. But the main one was the ability to select a limited slip differential, or you could also get power steering or air conditioning. Couldn't do both. You only get one creature comfort, not both of them. If you want more, you have to pay up for the GSL SE model, which also came with an upgraded 13B rotary engine with fuel injection. But what we have here is the mid-level 13A carbureted rotary engine, which we'll look at in a minute. Also, this is the special Targa Edition model, which means it has basically a sunroof that you can remove and stow in the back of the car to make it feel a bit more like a convertible. There was a convertible later offered in the next generation, the FC RX-7, but this is the closest thing you could get to a convertible on the first generation FB RX-7. With that being said, let's take a review type tour of this FB RX-7. Around the back of the FB RX-7, you immediately notice this very large, pronounced rear wing. Now, this isn't just some racer type mod. This is actually a period correct modification that came as part of an optional body kit that you could get from an aftermarket company called Mariah. They also offered a wide body kit and a turbo kit for it, because in Japan only there was a turbo version of this RX-7. Unfortunately, we didn't get it in the United States, but you could do that if you went to Mariah and wanted them to help you out. So this is actually a period correct wing here that is meant to look like the wings and part of the body kit of the famous IMSA GTU FB RX-7 race cars, which was famous because the FB RX-7 went into IMSA GTU racing, and for the entire 7-year production run, it won every single time. So to celebrate that fact, Mazda actually would put a little decal on the rear window, the rear 3/4 window here, that was just bragging about being able to win that racing series. And if you're constantly winning a racing series for the entire production run of the car and not anybody can take you down, I think it's okay to have some bragging rights there. So, and one more thing that I want to talk about is that this RX-7 weighed in at about 2,800 pounds, which for a car is quite lightweight. And that was part of the RX-7's whole ethos as a sports car. The other Japanese sports cars made more power, and they were tempered by that whole gentleman's agreement later on in the 1990s that said they could only produce 276 horsepower. But the FD RX-7, the most powerful version of that, was 255 because it made up for it due to its lightweight and aerodynamic design. And to that end, it was a bit more of a handling focused sports car, which is something that Mazda has really locked down with the MX-5, which came several years after the end of the FB RX-7. When this car was out, there was no MX-5 at all. There was maybe development of the MX-5, but the MX-5 wasn't around. It was just the RX-7. So let's talk a little bit on rear practicality. This glass hatch, which has these gloriously 1970s, 80s style louvers on the back. Opens up to reveal a pretty decently sized open cargo area. Not that much to talk about, but there was the option of getting some rear seats in the FB RX7, which I didn't know was a thing. But a couple things that I wanted to show you. This Mazda RX-7 repair manual, which if you own a rotary car, this is gonna be something that's important to have at all times. But what I like about it is because this car has pop-up headlights. As you could probably see earlier, the Mazda RX-7 has always had pop-up headlights, and the whole popping up and popping down the headlights and getting it to wink is sort of a cultural fun type thing to do. And they have that on the cover. This RX-7 on the cover is winking at you, which I find funny. Who knows if anyone else does. But yeah, there's not that much to talk about in the cargo area. Nobody really cares about the cargo area of an RX-7, but you have an open area, and at the very front of it, just before the backs of the front seats, you have a couple little cubby holes for storing extra items. But that's really it when it comes to cargo area back here. So with that being said, let's hop inside. Here we are hopping in the front seat of the FB Mazda RX-7, and as you'd expect for a car of this size, for me being 6'3", it's a bit cramped in here. It's not horrible, but if I had one real complaint, it's that these seats don't really go up or down when I'm driving it. I feel like I'm sitting a little bit too high. That's not the RX-7's fault, that's my fault for being too tall. So you get inside and you're greeted with this gloriously 80s interior. And what I mean by that is everywhere you look, it's either brick red or an overly developed, overly designed radio system. That's what you want from an 80s sports car. You get in and you sit on these plushy red cloth seats, and then you reach behind you to grab your beautiful brick red seat belt, 3-point seat belt, and you clip it in place. You're ready to go. So not only are your seats red, your seatbelt buckle's red, the seatbelt itself is red, the gear selector knob is red, the carpet's red, the dashboard's red, the door panel's red, the steering wheel's red, the gauges are red. Even the gauges in the gauge cluster on this RX-7 match the red color everywhere else. So it's really honing in on that perfect 1980s theme. And furthering that point, again, you have an absolutely over-designed radio system right here, which has a cassette player, which is what you would want. And below that, you have all of these different little sliders for really getting the most out of your sound, because this was a common thing on 1980s cars. And I believe this upgrade radio was something that came on the GSL model. Further up from the center console storage lid, you have this little joystick here, which adjusts where the sound is coming out from your upgraded radio. Again, the GSL, you get this little 1980s joystick to play with to configure where the sound is coming out at its most intense levels. So that's what you get when you pay up for a GSL. And then you have these two blank switches right here, which operate your power windows. Again, another GSL upgrade. Power windows here, you can just play around with these all day instead of cranking it up and down and cranking it again. And you have power windows here, which is a nice little luxurious feature to have, especially in the 1980s. And then forward from that, you have what any good rotary powered sports car should have, a manual transmission. This one is a 5-speed manual, but there was a 3-speed automatic available, which I'm sorry, but if you're considering an automatic rotary car, what's wrong with you? Like, actually, what's wrong with you? Automatic transmission and a rotary car go together like mustard and vanilla ice cream. It just does not work. So what we have here is what any good RX-7 should have, a good old manual transmission and 3 pedals over in the driver's footwell, which we're going to be experiencing here in a minute when we take this car out for a drive. And then forward from that, I see this panel says push on it, which intrigues me. What is it telling me to push to do? Ah, yes, the ashtray. Another 1980s essential for any car, and of course, it spans the entirety of this center console area. And then up from that, again, you have that upgraded radio that I've already talked about. And on top, you can see that the original owner of this car decided that air conditioning was more important to them than power steering. So this car has air conditioning but no power steering, which in a car of this size and of this ethos is what I would go for as well. Over in the driver's side, you have a traditional analog gauge cluster as you'd expect. Again, the background and the numbers on the gauges are basically the exact same color as the rest of the interior. I don't think that was intentional, but because this car is the red interior, it's what you have. And I absolutely love that this car just really fires the red point home. In terms of gauges, you have all the essentials. You have your tachometer over on the left, and then it's flanked by a oil pressure gauge and a battery volt gauge. And then on the right, you have your speedometer, which is flanked by engine temperature and your fuel gauge. And then on the bottom, you have your basic warning lights. And you can see that this car has 210,000 miles, and its current owner uses it as a daily driver, which sort of takes a little bit out of the whole all rotary cars are unreliable argument. Yes, later rotary cars were known for having issues, but these FB RX7s, it seems that they're quite reliable if you know how to look after them the way you're supposed to look after rotary cars. And this steering wheel also is a 3-spoke 1980s style sports car steering wheel. If I had one complaint, it's that it feels a little bit too big, and especially since I can't lower the seat enough to be super comfortable, you do kind of have to man spread to drive it properly, and this steering wheel just feels a little bit big, but I think that's just issues with the whole seat adjustment. But this is an absolutely glorious 1980s sports car style steering wheel, and I'm looking forward to using it. So let's move this along and look underneath the hood at what is the most important part of a Mazda RX-7, the engine. Let's go. Now, it wouldn't be an RX-7 without the famous Wankel rotary engine. And now I'm going to badly explain how a rotary engine works. So a piston engine is what you have in pretty much every single boring regular car that nobody cares about. And what happens in that is you have a piston moving up and down in a cylinder with a rotating crankshaft at the bottom. And there's typically valves that open in the top to let in fuel and air and then let out exhaust. And piston engines are fine. They seem to be pretty reliable, but they're boring and they're rough and they don't rev very high. And now what a rotary engine has in contrast is one of these. This is called a rotor, and it rotates around a spinning crankshaft that goes in the center in a rotor housing, sort of like this. And what you have on every single end are the tips. These are the apex seals, which is kind of comparable to piston ring seals that you have in the tops of pistons. And when these go, then it can cause problems and you'll need a full engine rebuild to fix that. This is a different type of engine. Yes, it takes the same type of fuel. Yes, it has the same type of emissions coming out the back, but everything that happens between putting the fuel in at the fuel pump and expelling it out through the exhaust, everything that happens here is different. It's different to drive, it's different to care for. But let's talk about the rotary engine we have in here. Once again, this is a GSL model, so it has a carbureted 1.1 liter twin rotor engine. So that means it has two of these things spinning around, rotating around, making a lot of power, and it'll rev north of 7,000 RPM. And it developed around about 110 horsepower. But this engine was codenamed the 12A. I said 13A earlier, ignore that, I was wrong, don't listen to me. Let's find out what it's like by taking this RX-7 out for a drive. It's customary that we're driving a 1970s, 1980s car, so we have to wear driving gloves, of course. That is essential. Let me put on my, again, glorious red seatbelt, which I love how the seatbelts are red, and even the buckles are red, and everywhere you look at, everything in this interior is red. All right, so again, 1.1 liter twin rotor, 110 horsepower. Can't expect it to be the fastest thing in the world, but the thing about an RX-7 is it's a bit more about the feel of driving and the handling as well. but we're gonna take it out on just regular roads and see what it's like. The first thing that I really notice when I'm driving along in one of these things is how many noises there are. And I'm not just talking about all the creaks and rattles, which is kind of what you'd expect for a 1970s, 1980s car, especially one with 210,000 miles. A lot of it has to do with this engine. As you'd expect for driving a rotary, the sound that you get is different from what you'd get from a traditional piston engine car, but it's way more different than I expected it to be. That is to say, in a piston engine car, you're traditionally used to hearing either the intake sound coming from up front or the exhaust sound bringing up the rear. When I drive this car, it's just like a whole surround sound thing. I'm hearing buzzing, I'm hearing whining at random areas just surrounding me. There's buzzes and whines, and it's very interesting. There's all sorts of different noises that you're hearing all around you. They just surround you in this car, and that adds to its whole personality that a rotary engine car particularly is known for. These things are known for their different feel, their different sound, their different just everything, and they're different to drive. I'm told that I have to keep it above 3,000 RPM as much as I can just when I'm cruising, because if it's revving too low, then it doesn't really like that. Again, this is a different sort of car. Hear that rotary whine, a rotary buzzing. Sounds like it's fueled by bees everywhere. I feel like I'm just getting surrounded by bees. I feel like I'm driving a hornet's nest. In terms of handling and things like that, as you'd expect for IMSA GTU racing 7 years in a row, RX-7 FB model, the handling is pretty sweet. And with the lack of power steering, this steering right here feels more connected than pretty much any modern car, obviously. Handling's amazing, steering's amazing, but the feel and the sound of this engine there's a bit of an exhaust pop too when I let off. I'm not sure if the microphone's picking this up. I'm having this much fun, and I'm going 30. There it is. When you're driving it, it has all the distinct old car feeling to it. You're handling this big steering wheel. There's no power steering. There's not that much put in to muffle out the outside world. The ride in this car is not very pleasant, I will say. And there's a lot of sound coming in, a lot of wind noise, a lot of all this other stuff. But the thing about this car is that it's not supposed to be engineered for creature comforts. It's supposed to be thrilling and have a personality to it. And to that end, it does that exceedingly well. And again, the handling's really good. Just the feel of it, you push it all the way up to 7,000. It's not fast. I was flooring it there, and there's a Toyota Highlander that was riding 2 feet off my bumper, telling me to get out of the way, slowpoke, but I was pretty much giving it about as much as it has. I think that was the main reason why the FB RX7 wasn't really super well regarded in the Japanese sports car community. Doesn't make a lot of power, and they made a lot of them. So this was really the everyman's version of the RX-7. You can find these pretty, man, this ride is so bad. These have always been pretty widely available, and when it comes to the Japanese car things that Japanese car kids want, which is tuning and big power and 276 horsepower, the FB kind of fails on that front because it's only 110 horsepower, but that means that you're even more encouraged to really just beat on it in everyday driving. I mean, I'm not even at the speed limit yet. So yeah, it's not fast, like I said, but that's not what makes the FB special, in my opinion. What makes it special is the feel of it, the sounds, all the different buzzes and whines that you hear, the handling, which is amazing. And when I compare it to other Japanese sports cars of the day, namely really the only 80s Japanese sports car that I've also driven, the 300ZX, this completely blows the 300ZX out of the water in terms of all the stuff that makes an 80s sports car special. So yeah, it's slow and the ride comfort is pretty diabolical, but every other part of this driving experience is what you want from a car like this, and a rotary car at that. And to wrap up, I want to say thank you to John for lending me his RX-7 to review. And if you're watching this video and you live in the Utah area and you're open to lending me a car to do a video with, my email is right here and my Instagram is below in the description of this video. John's the first one as a viewer to offer to let me review a car, and I'm really grateful for that. So if you want to lend me a car to review, you have a cool car, don't hesitate to let me know, and hopefully we can work something out. So with one more pull, we'll end this. Oh yeah, that's pretty sweet. With that final pull, that final 7,000 RPM pull, I want to thank everybody for watching. Like, subscribe, do all the normal YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.